Welcome to Escapists Anonymous, the fantasy fiction book club. I'm Sam.
And I'm Dan.
This week, we'll be falling headfirst through time and space as Livira and her friends try to escape a city under assault and a library wreathed in flames. Eva returns to the exchange with her siblings and are forced to confront those who they long held to be mortal foes. Get ready to see new alliances formed, new enemies encountered, and new mysteries uncovered, as well as enough spoilers to fill a library, as we finish off Mark Lawrence's The Book That Wouldn't Burn. So, we finished it. The longest one we've done, a 4-parter.
Yeah.
At the end of this book, and wow, what a book.
It felt like a real epic fantasy.
Yeah, there was an epicness to this, like the whole, just the fire, like this entire, I think this entire quarter, I think we picked a good point to have a break here, because, you know, this one picks up and it's just like, everything's on fire, burning, 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 right up until the end. This is just like the fire quarter of this book.
It absolutely is. Shall I do a recap to remind everyone that's hopefully read along? As usual, public health warning for spoilers before I jump in, but strap in because things got crazy. So, while Livira is at Ute's house, the Sabbers launch their attack on Craith City. Malar arrives with many of Livira's friends, and Ute says that they must all seek refuge within the library. When they arrive at the library, the Sabbers have got there before them. Livira and Malar go to find Arpix, Milan and Jella, and Ute breaks off to find Yamala, revealing as he departs that she is in fact his wife. Just before they enter the library, we discover that the Sabbers have used a human slave to enter the library and open the doors that Sabbers cannot open themselves. Yamala summons an assistant to lead the group of survivors to safety, but as they make their way through the library, the assistant that has been previously possessed by the escape attacks from behind, battles with the assistant that's been leading them through the library, and during the fight, the good assistant starts to turn from white to grey, and the corrupted assistant turns from black to grey as the escape spreads between the two of them, but it can't control both, and they end up motionless on the floor. Livira suggests that they head to the maze chamber that she knows better than anyone. Once there, she begins to gather all of her pages of writing from the different books and put them together into one book. But when she climbs up to stand atop the shelves, she sees that there is a great fire spreading through the library towards them, as well as a battle between human soldiers and the Sabbers. Livira reveals that she and Arpix opened a portal to the exchange in Chamber 7, and they should head there to escape. While on the way, Ute explains that he and Yamala were once assistants who chose to become human. But as they're fleeing towards the portal, the battle behind catches up to them. Meanwhile, Ivar, Starvel and Kerrol execute a plan to distract the assistant and the soldier in order to re-enter the exchange from their timeline, and Ivar thinks he has outsmarted Clovis to prevent her from entering. They enter the exchange at the same moment as Livira, Ute and the other survivors are entering from the burning library. Malar knocks Kerrol down, but then is badly injured by Clovis, who has found a way in. As Clovis attacks Livira, Ute intervenes and talks Clovis down, explaining that there was a time when humans and Sabbers, or Caniths, as we now know them to be called, lived harmoniously in Craith City together. This was the time that Livira and Ivar had visited as ghosts previously. Responding to Livira's distress about Malar's injuries, Ivar takes him back to the library's healing centre circle in his timeline, accompanied by Livira, even though it means Livira and Malar will forever after only be able to return to their own timeline as ghosts. While there, once Malar is recovered, Livira realises that she will be able to open the chamber doors that Ivar has never been able to. But when they do, they are confronted by giant insectoids, the Skier. They attack, and the soldier fights them off, while Livira, Ivar and Malar escape back to the exchange. When Levira realizes that Arpix, Milan, Jella, and Salamander did not make it through the portal into the exchange, she decides to return to the burning library as a ghost to try to rescue them. With the guide Valente's help, they track the survivors through the burning library and on the way spot the 2 corrupted assistants being moved by the escape one at a time away from the flames. They come across a pack of Caniths fleeing the flames. It's some of the same Caniths who attacked Levira's settlement when she was just a child, and they have Carlotte as a hostage. Despite being a ghost, it seems they can sense Levira's presence, and it turns out it's because of her book that she's carrying. When the Caniths start shooting at her, Eva grabs onto the book, and while they're both touching it, they are transported into one of the stories as though they are in the mechanism. They escape the Caniths, but lose the book in the process. When they find Arpix and the other survivors, they are trapped in a library chamber that has flames coming at them from all directions. As ghosts, there is nothing that Levira, Malar, and Eva can do, but Levira has an idea. They go back to the corrupted assistants, and Levira and Malar fight off the occupying escape to each take control of one of them. Eva realizes at this moment that they have become the soldier and the assistant from his timeline. Levira uses her assistant blood to open a portal to the exchange to rescue Arpix, Milan, and the others. When Eva follows Levira, the assistant, through the portal, he arrives to see Ute and Yamala directing survivors through another portal, but no sign of Levira. Suddenly, Mayland arrives. He exclaims that Jaspeth is right and the knowledge contained within the library should be torn down, and then he kills Yamala. Eva, realizing that the assistant and soldier in his timeline, i.e. Levira and Malar, are fighting the skier, jumps back through his portal to come to their assistance. Levira, as the assistant, goes back into the burning library and finds Malar, or the soldier, who has reclaimed Levira's book. She helps Carlotte escape the Caniths and then sets up a fireproof chamber for the Caniths that will, in the future, become Eva's home, and they head into the mechanism to rest. Eva finds the assistant and the soldier dead in his timeline, having fought off most of the skier. Eva believes that Levira is dead, but cannot see that she and Malar are watching him as ghosts. As he is just about to try to fight the remaining skier, Clovis and Carol arrive, and together they kill them, before heading off into the unknown world that awaits them outside their library chamber. So, apologies about the length of that recap, but there was a lot to catch up on. I mean, it feels absolutely wide open for the sequel because, as we've said before, the whole way that the time travel and exchange things work with being a ghost in your past, but being able to be physical and real in your future means that there's still an opportunity for this love story to come back together.
One of the positives with it in this book is he did a good job at closing some loops. He used it to explain why the soldier and the assistant were different from all the others. And as I predicted, Malar was the soldier. I called it.
Yeah, you said it from very early on, and I doubted you. So what did you think about the end in general?
We've talked about this with the opening books in trilogies or series. And I think this one did the best job at closing off the story, but setting up the new one. You know, we had loads and loads of stuff answered, but we know that there's this Jaspeth, Irad thing going on over the top, and we kind of know that that's the overarching thing, the origins of the library. The story of Levira and Eva getting to know each other, falling in love, figuring out what the heck was going on with the book that wouldn't burn, with, you know, Eva's obsession with this book, like all of that answered. And I felt that most of it was pretty satisfactory.
Yeah, it had that classic climax, like the pace increases, the fire has a big part to play in that.
The fire,
I think given the nature of the storyline beforehand, I think it had to be quite complex. I think if it wasn't a complex ending, I might have been quite disappointed. But also these really nice juxtaposed moments with the peaceful moments inside of Lavera's book, where they're getting an opportunity to just press pause and be present in a moment and maybe sum up some of the feelings. And then there's this strange one at the end where she's sort of telling the story of the princess in the castle. Is it the Rapunzel story? Yeah. Which I couldn't quite figure out whether that was just in her head.
I've got questions about. This is one of the things that I was still unclear about. Their books touch, and then somehow they get pulled into it. Again, you know how I mentioned in the previous episode about how it feels like the mechanism is kind of a distillation of an effect of the library as a whole, where you go into it and it kind of allows the books to be projected out, but we're seeing other elements of it. Like with this book, is this another way that the library is now allowing them to travel inside a book without having to use a mechanism? Because suddenly they're warped inside the book when both of them touch it. I'm not entirely clear why that happens. I mean, some of the bits in it were really nice because it gave them a chance to have a quiet moment, to have these romantic elements, and also to show the reason why Eva was so obsessed with Lavera, because he was living in this. He was living in her stories for who knows how many centuries potentially. And that I thought was really cool, but I just didn't understand why that was happening.
But there's the bit earlier on where the assistant doesn't like the fact that there's two versions of a book from different dimensions in the same library. I wondered whether there was a thing where actually that might have happened if any two books from different dimensions touched each other.
This is one of the things that you have to do with time travel. And also because this is a fantasy book. Some things are just magic.
One of the questions I've got, or I guess it's more of a statement. It's a time loop story. And it turns out that it was all inevitable. Like it was all going to happen the way that it happened.
Yes.
Do you agree with that?
If we go along with that, I guess because we've reached the end of that big loop of where we were traveling around, there's not been a future point we visited. This is as far forward in time as any of the characters have got, and everything seems to have been finished off. I guess that means that, yes, it was inevitable and always going to happen. But if that's the case, then it opens up other questions about Ute's whole philosophy about how this doesn't have to repeat each other. And
that's my next question.
Yeah, like how much should we be just fatalistic about what Ute was trying to do? Like it was always doomed to end like this, no matter what he did. Let's talk more about Eva and Lavera as their relationship. Did you enjoy it across the course of the book, the way it developed?
It felt like there was a depth of connection between them, I think. In spite of actually, when you think about it, the very limited interactions that they actually have.
It was only in the second half of the book I really started to believe that there was a relationship to be had. I thought they got on well in the earlier parts, but I think what was really nice was when we were jumping between their two perspectives, both of them believed there to be a fragility to the relationship, having their doubts about, the other one, especially after they found out that each other were, Kenneth and human. And they were like, well, they must be the one who can no longer love me because they must see me as so ugly and hideous. And it wasn't that their love diminished for each other. It was just all their insecurities being projected onto the other one. And I felt that was a really nice way to do the relationship because it felt like there was something they wanted to fight for, but they didn't know quite what to do with it. There was that barrier of the fact that they were different species. And it made me think, well, they're overcoming this and bonding together because of their love for each other. It felt like a strong relationship.
But I think also what was good about it was, I think what they're attracted to as much as anything else is the idea and the potential, because they haven't been allowed to fully explore it. It's this thing that they're kind of reaching for. And so it's this light at the end of the tunnel that it hasn't been fully explored. It's a potentially massive thing.
I think you're right. Like we don't have a huge amount of physicality, and it has to be disconnected from that because earlier on we had to have that misleading thing where they didn't realize who each other really were, and so by its very nature, it had to be based on their personalities, and for it to be a very emotional connection rather than necessarily a physical one. And the moments of physicality that they had presaged them realizing who each other were, and that caused the disconnect.
Yeah.
And they had to work to get back to being at a more connected point. And now they're very physically disconnected because they're separated through time, or one of them's now a ghost.
Yeah.
I don't know how long the next book will take to reunite them. Could you string out an entire book where, like, the final goal at the end of it is they're reunited again, or will it happen early on and there's something else that's come along?
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously Carol heads out of the library saying, "I know where to find your
Yeah.
girl,"
And that
or
sets it
whatever
up
it
for the
says.
next book, but whether that's going to be like that's the first part and then they go on to deal with other things that have come along.
Yeah. So I've got a very detailed question about just that moment.
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
was Starvel?
Hiding in the shadows, just sneaking around in the background. But you're right. I mean, he's around. I just assumed he was there. Was
He's
he
not
not?
mentioned. I listened to it twice and I was like, does he come in and help? Because Carol's not a fighter and he's just clinging onto one of these skiers' legs basically whilst Clovis does all the
Yeah. So
all
in
the
my head,
fighting.
it was all four of them heading off together, like walking off into the darkness.
No, Starvel's not mentioned there, and I was a bit puzzled by whether his absence was deliberate or whether it was one of those things where he'll just be there in the second book,
Yeah.
or whether he's gone off with Mayland and
So in theory, he's still back in the exchange with all the humans.
or he's come back in and headed off somewhere else in the library chamber. But yeah, I just wondered whether he was going to go off with Mayland, maybe.
But yeah, I love that kind of that, you know, like, oh, let's go and explore. And they've got the new enemy,
Yeah,
the Skier.
yeah,
But also, is it going to turn out they're not an enemy like the Cannith weren't to the humans and vice versa? Is it going to be another, like, they're just misunderstood insect creatures? Also, when the door opened and they were just standing there and it seemed to be like they were waking up.
yeah, like they'd cryogenically frozen themselves or
Like,
something.
yeah, they'd gone into...
Sort of hibernation.
Yeah, what did it say? That they untold weight of sleep. But why were they waiting at that door? And why are suddenly so many of them suddenly flooded in? Were they all just waiting off in the shadows? The description of them was so cool, you know, because it wasn't just, oh, black insectoid creatures, like a kind of alien xenomorph thing. They had this kind of pale thing, but the parts of their cartilage were all different colors. So they seem like quite a vibrant race of creatures. And, you know, with the big scissor arms and the 6 eyes, you know, I've got a really good sense of them as creatures. And, you know, if they're owners of the library now, are they using it? Where are their sections of books? Were they the ones from the shadow books? Because that shadow book seemed to depict some kind of insectoid creature.
Well, and how have they accessed it? Because we know that the chamber's outside the chamber that Ivar and his siblings are in. They're all human chambers, aren't they? So how would the Skier have got in there? Maybe they have human slaves
got other routes in, because isn't it like it's spread throughout the entire mountains? They could have other accesses and other doors that allow them through the initial
or
bit.
they could have a colony of Cannith slaves and human slaves just in order to be able to control. Because that's what Yamala says the curse of the library is, that it's a library, knowledge can only be unlocked by a society that works together, which Livera counters is a library that rewards slavery, basically. So the species that can enslave all of the other species and use them to open access to all of the library will be the species that gains access to all of the knowledge within the library. So maybe the Skier are the biggest, scariest.
But that's the thing, isn't it? Like those two approaches, cooperation or domination.
Yeah.
Again, it shows the fact that the library is this resource that is amoral. Because there's a line, it offers not knowledge of good and evil, but knowledge for good and evil. And that kind of summarizes really well what the library is. You know, the whole Jaspeth and Irad situation, they both collaborated to make it. The very simplistic reading is that Irad was good, Jaspeth was bad. It's not that. And I think we're going to learn there's going to be no more nuance to that. I don't think the followers of Jaspeth are entirely wrong. I think that's going to be a nice, complex element. You know, a good villain or a good antagonist is someone who often makes a good point, but their methodology in achieving it is the thing that makes them the villain.
Yeah.
But I want to talk a little bit about what constitutes the earlier part of the bit we just read. Like the whole fall of the city was great. Before everything got really complicated with the time travel and all the closing of the loops at the end, I was really gripped going into the section because you just like, oh crap, the city's about to fall, we've got to go. And then the panic that you see in Levira, where all the people she's connected with over the previous decade, she's desperate to get them all. She's like, I need to find all these people. And they're like, there's no time. If they turn up, then great. And, you know, I've had nightmares like that where I'm just desperately trying to gather up everybody. It's that worst case scenario where you just you do not have the time. All you have to do is just flee. And it's terrifying. And I feel Mark Lawrence did a really good job of conveying the panic, the urgency beforehand. I mean, building in the background, and then suddenly it's foreground. It's there. It's a present danger, and you really had to adjust to it. And then I love how in the background of that, the whole hierarchy of the city, you've been like, oh, you can't be a librarian. Bip, 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 bip. You know, like King Owenald will never allow this. Look at me, Lord Algar. And then suddenly it's all gone. There's no fanfare about it. The remnants of the aristocratic presence in the city is just Lord Algar, and that's all we have left.
Do you think that was the purpose of Lord Algar in the whole story? To kind of demonstrate the insignificance of what people really concern themselves with in the grand scheme of time and the dust to dust thing?
I think in this book, that's exactly what he served to be. He was supposedly an antagonist, but really he never was, because the arc of this story extends way beyond his life.
Yeah.
And so us focused in the now thought that. And I was like, oh, I can't wait to see how he falls and stuff. But really, he doesn't fall because it doesn't really matter. It's not about his comeuppance.
There's a bit where he's railing against you in the exchange, isn't there? It's like, you're the reason why it's all fallen down and the downfall of the king. And it's just a bit like, so?
I don't care.
Like, literally lived through thousands of years of this, so get over it, mate.
And that's it. He just couldn't see beyond the end of his nose because he thought that he had these grand schemes and politics that goes on, but it was all for nothing. But I think, because we don't know what happened to the humans, and we've got this idea that the Caniths went off and formed a little society and end up being those four. Will we find out that the humans went off and had their own, with their own mechanism and their own little societies built up? And will Lord Algar have tried to reassert his dominance there? So will he just become a little footnote, being like, oh, when they formed the new society, Lord Algar tried to assume power, but it quickly fell, and that's all we get of him? Or will he actually manage to affect what the new human society became?
I think we needed something to show us how much of an outsider Levira was in the city of Craith and how that was seen by high society as a risk. And I don't think it could have been the king directly. So it needed to be some proxy for the king. I think if I was betting, I would say I don't think we'll see Lord Elgar again.
Yeah. If we didn't, I wouldn't be surprised. If there was a leap back in time where we might see what happened to those humans, he'll play maybe a fleeting part, but I think it's open to what could be done with him. But I wouldn't be surprised if nothing again.
So one of my really interesting questions, or I think it's interesting, we'll see if you agree. So you says about changing from assistants to humans, like they were assistants and they chose to become mortal. We've now had the experience of being inside an assistant's head with Levira, and that just doesn't feel like something an assistant would choose to do or concern themselves with.
Yeah.
So I wonder, actually, is there a involvement of a higher power there? Do we think Irad is maybe behind that decision? Because it just doesn't feel like it would have been something that all the assistants would get together and make a decision about.
I agree that Irad is almost certainly still some kind of presence out there. Whether he made a decision about it, I don't know. Because if you think about what happened with Ute, about how he's drifted away from the followings of Irad, then maybe not. I think what we might learn more about is when Eva and Levira turn up and there's just been this big ritual to turn them into more human. We don't know what happened in that ritual, and we don't know whether it was something absolutely horrific maybe to force assistant workings inside the bodies of two children or something like that. Because I thought the assistants had a hive mind kind of feature, but they all seem to have a more individualistic nature. And it makes you wonder if assistants aren't just robots. What if they are all formed from some kind of original being that was turned into an assistant and they were kind of reversing the process?
I just had a thought, what if it's just another time loop thing and actually Levira has to go back and create Ute and Imala?
You know what? I wouldn't be surprised. Again, the idea of creation of life can only be done by an external influence. Like humanity appeared on here because an asteroid landed on Earth and it spread bacteria. So maybe it doesn't even have to be Levira or Eva. It could be just some other person who gets involved in all of this.
It's going to be Mayland, isn't it?
There we go. And he was
so
just
that doesn't feel right. But
what if he's just really annoyed? It's like, you two went off to do your thing and you've messed it up. Now I have to go and kill Yamala and try and reset my mistake or something like that.
Yeah.
Because with Mayland, we've got so many questions. He clearly has information that we don't know. He clearly knows about Ute and Yamala. He knows about their whole backstory, their marriage, the fact that they aren't even in love anymore, all this kind of stuff. So like with him turning up and just blowing wide open so much of what we assumed was going to happen, he has so much more knowledge of future events. So he's clearly been hopping around doing a bunch of stuff to learn more about this. And he's come to his own conclusions. Whether we agree with them when we get further into the other books, I don't know. But he's clearly been up to some stuff that involves Ute and Yamala because he's aware of them.
Yeah. Just going back to Malar and being the soldier. So, our first clue, I guess, that you hooked onto about the soldier being Malar was when he had that uncharacteristic outburst at Eva and says, if you hurt her, there's no army on Earth that will save you, blah, blah, blah. By that point, Malar already knows the way the whole story turned out.
Yeah.
So that was the bit that I kind of, not wanting to be a total pedant, started to go back and unpick a little bit. I was like, that seemed a bit unnecessary.
Yeah, because he already knows who Ivar is.
And he spent time with him and got over the fact that he's a Saba or Canith. And he knows that Levira's in love with him and he's a part of the trio that kind of work together to save the survivors.
Well, here's another question that comes off of that is that, so if they do know all of that, when they're gathering the siblings to go into the mechanism, is that in order to create the circumstances that allow Eva to then travel, or is it for an additional purpose? Because Malar didn't really know much about the book and its special properties, but it explains why he refers to Eva as, is your boy in there? I get that bit, but is it all just for the purpose of allowing Eva to meet them in the future, or is there some kind of other purpose? Because it seems like the whole society is guided then by everything that the assistant and the soldier are doing. And how do they know that everything they're doing is leading towards that exact moment to create Eva?
As in, are they just literally following almost a plan to put the pieces in place because otherwise, butterfly effect, if everything's not exactly as it was, then they'll never meet.
Because now that they are outside of that time and they've come into the past of that bit in order to then orchestrate it all, how much do they have to just give in to the whims of the flow of time and the inevitability of it all? Or how much is it them guiding it? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Hopefully that'll be explained a bit more. And
this is why time travel's always broken. Like this is my issue with time travel. You poke and you prod it too much, and makes you feel dissatisfied with what you find out when you investigate, when you think about it too much, and that's bugging me now.
Yeah, and then also back to the beginning almost, where when Eva finds the book, I don't think anyone's supposed to believe that he finds the book by accident. So someone has to leave it in the exact spot where he's going to find it at that exact moment.
This is why we'll need flashbacks to Levira placing the book there when she's the assistant.
In that tower that he's going to run into being chased by an escape.
Yeah, how does it end up there? Ugh. The more we discuss it, the more I'm thinking there's a lot that actually wasn't answered. There was me going into the recording of this episode thinking, you know what? I think everything was closed off quite nicely, but I'm finding more and more here where I'm just like, okay, no, there's too much open here. Like I know a lot of this is all going to get answered, hopefully, but yeah,
Yeah.
how does that book end up there? And also with the escapes, because it all gets happened because an escape burst out. So like the fact that the escape is the thing that triggers it, is that linked with it? Because we still don't really know why the escapes are coming out of the mechanism. Why is that the source? And also, if the portals in the exchange are also a source of them, are these just weaknesses within the library itself that allow the Jasper's forces to come in? How is this the two sources of them? Were the ones that came out of the exchange, had they previously come out of a mechanism?
Why do they come out when people are interested in asking certain questions?
Like about Mayland,
Yeah.
is it because he's so now intertwined with Jasperth that
Yeah.
Jasperth is now working to keep Mayland safe?
Yeah. So I think Malin's story is a big one because I think his involvement in this felt almost too fleeting. Like he comes out, he's whatever you want to call it, fundamentalist, Jasper supporter, kills Yamala, and that's it. Sort of chastises Ute for not following through on his words enough or not having an extreme enough interpretation of Jasper's philosophy.
Yeah.
But we don't get any backstory. We don't know which portal he jumped out of and where he's come from and why he has these very extreme views.
I think he has mastered the use of the exchange because you know how there's that point towards the end of the book where they're just standing in front of one portal, and effectively that's all you need. When you've mastered it, there's just one, because different portals is to help people who don't travel through time so often visualize different dimensions, different points in time. And then when you get it all down, you realize it's all just one portal and it's about intention.
Yeah.
And that made a lot more sense to me. And it kind of made me annoyed. Like, I don't know why they think that having so many portals is the. Because, we had that whole discussion about
Is that helpful?
Well, they theorize all the different things about, like, well, that one's then, this one's forward and backwards in time. And all the experiments they would have had to have gone to really understand it. And the exposition we had to read in order to justify how they know what they're doing. Really, if you just had one portal a lot quicker, would that have been simpler? I mean, I get it. Like, there is no spoon kind of situation. There's all just one portal. So when Mayland jumped out of that one portal, for him, all he's seeing is one portal, and he's just emerging when he wants to. He's knowing that he's jumping out of the point where he needs to attack Yamala.
Yeah.
That's what he's doing.
Before we wrap up, unless you've got any other thoughts, my things are actually about the exchange. We didn't really have anything other than that one other dimension they jumped into with the yellow furry creatures. There wasn't really any involvement of other dimensions outside of their timeline. Are we going to have anything to do with that? Malin's story, I think we need more of. Ute's daughter, ?
Yeah, Ute's daughter. Oh my God, yes. I completely forgot to put anything about that in my notes for this one.
I mean, it's just a question mark, I guess.
Yeah, I think also that means if we do learn more about her, I think we'll learn more about Yamala. Even though she's dead, I think there'll be some traveling back, and we'll see Ute and Yamala because she seemed to be such a presence. I was a bit affected when she died because there was that lost potential of that character. So I would like to think that we'll at some point learn more about Ute and Yamala's experience of doing all of this, because partly we'll need to find out more about his daughter. One last little thing is how much ghost possession is going to become a thing, because I think Mark Lawrence has really worked to put a lot of this in, because when the two escapes were moving backwards and forwards between the two assistants to get them to move, that felt really arbitrary. It's like, well, why do two need to control it, but only one human needs to control it? And you need to contrive it to get two assistants there in order to be possessed by Malar and Levira. So I couldn't tell which bit was more important in what I was reading there. Is it the fact that he's just trying to contrive to get the two assistants there, or is he doing it to try and demonstrate that possession is this interesting mechanic that can be used for different purposes?
But were there two escapes?
Yeah, it was going between them because only one escape isn't enough. That's why it was grey, because it had one escape.
But when did the second escape come into that timeline? It was really trapped
inside it. That's why the one that has hanging was grey. So an escape had been inside
I never got
assistants.
that the whole
Well,
time.
this is why it was really confusing. And that's why when it turned fully black, it's when there were two escapes in it. It felt like a really arbitrary thing.
Yeah. The other interesting thing I thought, just in a operational way, I was like, why can escapes possess and then unpossess? But when Levira and Malar went in, that was basically it. They were
Because
they
was
were
their
stuck
mind
in
more
there.
easily overridden by the programming, but escapes aren't subject to that because they're also part of the internal workings of the library. But they can only access it when there's a cut or a gash.
I guess in answer to your question about will there be more ghost possession of assistants and stuff, the good thing that he's built in is the fact that once you're in an assistant, you might be stuck there forever. So it's a big commitment to make.
But that's everything I've got. So I guess we should ask the questions when we
Oh,
finish a
yeah.
book.
We've got our key questions. Yeah. This one's been
So-
such a long book that I'd almost forgotten that we do that.
So for one, this world, did you enjoy it? Do you want to live in it?
I think I probably wouldn't want to live in it. I guess last time with the Foxglove King, I had qualifiers. If I could do this, and this, then I'd have a great time. But I mean, this seems like pretty long odds that you're going to be in any kind of favorable position. Yeah. And it's a universe where conflict is always, if not happening, then right around the corner. So I think it's a no from me, albeit I found the idea of being in the library and obviously, you know, time travel's cool. But I think the risks probably outweigh the rewards.
As much as I enjoyed all the mechanics, I think you're right. But if we said, oh, well, you're involved in the aspects of the world that we're reading about, so the library and stuff, way cooler. But I think I'd still find it too overwhelming. You know, they mention about how you get paralyzed by the choice of books because there's just too many. And we've talked about that as a whole thing. I feel like I would just still be frozen. I feel like I wouldn't know what to do with all of it. And the mechanism terrifies me of being lost in that. Like, what if you're reading a really crap book when it happens? Like, just really rubbish and you're stuck in it for centuries.
When you started talking, I had the opposite thing. I was like, oh man, I love books. And if I could take some of my favorite fantasy fiction books into the mechanism, I'd be having a great time.
What if you're reading a horror book and you're stuck inside it? And then when you experience really traumatic scenes, like you just go through PTSD and that has to be a whole thing. But in terms of whether I'd recommend this book, yes, absolutely. I would happily lend this off to someone, really, really recommend they read it. I still think that I would say they can keep it, take it on, pass on to someone else rather than me wanting it back. I think it depends on how the other books go if I want to have a little complete collection of these.
Yeah, I would also generally recommend it. I don't think everyone would love it. I actually think in terms of the feel and the tone, definitely if you liked Joe Abercrombie, the first Law trilogy, that kind of tone where actually it's quite intense and full on at times, but it has sort of great characters. I'd be definitely happy to read the second one and find out where it goes. I've got no hesitation about joining the world again at some point down the line.
Especially because now that the one world that kind of got built up in this book has just been burned to a crisp.
Yeah.
The second book's going to possibly open with the establishment of an entirely new world that they're experiencing. And that, well, it's as much of its continuation of the story, it's also going to be, we're starting from scratch, learning about a whole new world again. And that's really exciting. And I like a book series that does that. It's always going to be connected by the fact that the library is almost like this metaphor for the internet. You've got the avatars. Ivar and Levira effectively catfished each other because they were representing each other wrong. But yeah, I think that's going to be really interesting to see whether he continues with that metaphor as well. But, you know, speaking of the internet, those people out there who are listening, please get in touch with us through the internet.
Yeah, that's what it's there for. Almost solely for that purpose is to geek out over literature together.
But how can they get in contact with us, Dan?
So, yeah, we welcome and encourage, in fact, you to reach out, let us know your thoughts on any ideas that we've had, the book itself, characters, plot, world building, etc. on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Facebook. Just search at Escapists Anonymous Pod and leave a comment and we will happily read them out and discuss them in an episode.
Please tell us all your janky theories. I want wild theories. I want you to predict what's going to happen in the next book, and then we can really enjoy what your interpretation was and where you think it's going to go, because it's probably going to be wildly different from the stuff we've said.
And in the next episode, we're starting a brand new book, which is 6 Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lim. And we will be reading from the beginning up to the end of chapter 14. So get reading and join us then as we delve into a brand new world and a brand new adventure. So all that's left to say is we'll see you in the next episode. Join us then on Escapists Anonymous podcast. And it's goodbye from me.
And goodbye from me.